Throughout the New Testament, you will find that large portions of the letters that are written to different churches are all about how we follow Jesus in the variety of relationships that you find yourself. Why? I think Joseph Hellerman nails it when he says, long-term interpersonal relationships are the crucible of genuine progress in the Christian life. It's in the real, messy relationships that you work out the details of the life that you're made for. And in particular, the New Testament focuses on three primary circles of relationships. The first circle is the church. When Jesus transformed your relational life, as we talked about in session 1, he made your primary relational circle into the church. And sometimes there's overlap between this circle and the other circles. That's what so many of the different one another passages in the New Testament are all about. How to follow Jesus into our new relationships with the church. Here's just a sample of some of the one another passages all over the New Testament. Just listen to these. Love one another. Take the lead in honoring one another. Welcome each other. Live in harmony with one another. Don't lie to each other. Admonish one another. Suffer with one another. Rejoice with one another. Serve one another. Carry each other's burdens. Be kind to one another. Forgive one another. Consider others better than yourself. Encourage each other. Be hospitable to one another. Don't criticize one another. Don't complain about one another. Confess your sins to one another. Speak the truth in love to one another. Welcome one another. Greet one another with a holy kiss. That last one is a favorite of my Italian step family, but please don't unless you're invited to do so. And that's not even all the one another passages in the Bible or in the New Testament. But I encourage you to just read through the New Testament sometime and highlight all the different passages about what it takes to love one another well. In Everyday Habits, we dedicated a whole unit to just this relational circle because it's so important. And when we talk about it, we actually say there are 3 levels within it as well. And you can check that out in the Everyday Habits course. The second circle is the circle of your household. So if you read through the New Testament, you will find lots of sections that scholars like to call household codes. You see it in Colossians 3 and 4, 1 Peter 2 through 3, Ephesians 5 through 6. These are packed full of instructions for your household relationships, reimagining our household relationships in light of what Jesus has done by putting a redemptive spin on secular household codes. We'll focus mostly on marriage and parenting, but I want to start with singleness because for some of you, your household is basically just you and maybe some friends or roommates. Hear this. You don't have to get married and have kids to experience the relational life you're made for. That was a radical truth in the first century world. Tim and Kathy Keller put it this way: Christianity was the very first religion that held up adult singlehood as a viable way of life. Jesus was single, so was Paul, and he even wrote a whole section about the advantages of singleness in 1 Corinthians 7 that I remember reading right as I was engaged to be married. Singles and couples and families need one another. And we actually need to make space for each other. And when we do, there's this beautiful crossover that can happen between the circle of church and the circle of household. In my family growing up, we always had a woman around our house named Annie. She was a single Christian friend of my parents who became basically a functional grandparent for me because my grandparents lived far away. She would take us to the park or the fountains in downtown Portland where I grew up. She would join us for meals. She would help set up birthdays for me. And I remember she would let us eat for free often at her Italian restaurant that she managed. And so there's this beautiful thing that can happen when families and singles make room in their lives for each other. If you're married, you can't live like you're single. The New Testament says to stay married as you follow Jesus into the life you're made for. It says that in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 26, as far as it depends on you, with contingencies for abuse, abandonment, and affairs. And if you're not married, you are not only allowed, but encouraged to seek marriage if that's something that you desire. In the ancient world, husbands were basically permitted to treat their wives however they wanted. But the gospel changed that and subverted many of the normal expectations of marriage. And you see that in Ephesians 5. In fact, marriage can actually be something that pushes you toward the life that you're made for in the long run. As Gary Thomas says, what if God designed marriage to make us holy more than to make us happy? Now, if you're a parent with kids or a kid with parents, there are instructions for those relationships as well. In Ephesians chapter 6, 1 through 4, Paul writes, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, because this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may have a long life in the land. Fathers, don't stir up anger in your children, but bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. In particular, parents have a role as the primary disciple makers of their kids. And if you're a parent and you're not sure where to start, maybe just start by walking through Everyday Institute with them. As a final note, in the ancient world, it was far more common for older parents to live with their children and be part of their household, which is less common in our own world for a variety of reasons. But whether your aging parents live in your actual household or outside of it, you have a relational responsibility to them according to the New Testament. Speaking specifically of widows, Paul writes this, "But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them learn to practice godliness toward their own family first and repay their parents, for this pleases God. But if anyone does not provide for his own family, especially for his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." That's in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 4 and 8. In other words, how you care for your aging parents has to do a lot with your witness to the watching world. Circle 3 is your neighbors. The final circle of relationships is like a catch-all for all the other relationships outside of the church and your household. And the best word for this is the word neighbors, which, as Jesus described it, is anyone that's part of your everyday life. You could be your friends, your coworker, your classmates, or actually your literal neighbors as well. And when you read through the rest of the New Testament, you'll find that there are at least 2 specific types of relationships that fall under this category: unbelievers and then also marginalized neighbors as well. So first of all, unbelieving neighbors. As followers of Jesus, we're called to have real relationships with people who don't believe in Jesus, even as following Jesus changes how we experience those relationships. In Colossians 4, verses 5 and 6, Paul writes, "Act wisely toward outsiders, making the most of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you should answer each person." We need to participate in those relationships wisely as representatives of Jesus, which means that you might not do or say the same things that you used to when you're with them. For more on that, check out the Habit of Mission in the Everyday Habits course. And then we're also called to form relationships with people who are marginalized in our society, the people with whom our relational circles might never cross or include without intentionality because of the way that our world is set up. Just take James 1:27. It says, "Pure and undefiled religion before God the Father is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained from the world." Orphans and widows were 2 of the most marginalized groups in the ancient world. And the Old Testament also includes the immigrant and refugee, as well as those in poverty. And there's a big difference between seeing marginalized people as objects of charity and seeing them as people with whom you can form actual relationships with names and stories that you can know. Dorothy Day explains this so well in her memoir of Life Among the Poor, if you ever read it. Jesus had a relational life, and so do you. How do you follow Jesus into the relational life you're made for in the church, your household, and with your neighbors? One step at a time. What's one step you can take starting this week? Let me close with one story. In my first year as a pastor to young adults, we were a ragtag group of people. We had lots of people in and out of our ministry on any given week. And as we were cleaning up one night, I asked a new person about his family. It was a question I asked a lot. Who's your family? What are they like? And he responded by saying, "I don't have a family." And I was caught off guard, but he told me he never knew his biological mom or dad, and he'd been in and out of foster homes for his entire life. And without even thinking, I responded, "If you want, we can be your family." And I wasn't trying to be spiritual or anything like that. I don't even really know what I meant by that, but I was just full of young adult, idealistic energy, and I put that out there to him. And so he kept showing up. And not long after that conversation, we're all having a cookout in the park one day, and somebody is walking by and they ask us, "Hey, are you all some kind of family?" And my wife was the first to respond, "Yeah, we're something like that." That's just a glimpse of the relational life you're made for. A glimpse of the relational life that Jesus has given us access to. Jesus has given you access to a relationship with God the Father, and through him opened up a whole new family of relationships with people who can be known as your brothers and sisters. I love what Jesus says to people who have left some relationships to follow him into the relational lives they're made for. He says, "Truly I tell you," Jesus said, "there is no one who has left house or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for my sake and for the sake of the gospel, who will not receive 100 times more, now at this time, houses, brothers and sisters, mothers and children, and fields with persecutions, and eternal life in the age to come. Mark chapter 10, 29 through 30. That's a vision of the relational life you're made for that can start now and continue forever.